another exciting episode of the Nigeria in Focus show. My name is Oluwabukola Adumula, and it's a pleasure to be your host again for today. Our topic for today is democracy in focus, where we will dive deep into the complex landscape of Nigeria politics, the challenges that the country is facing in maintaining a stable democracy, and also possible strategy to ensure the peaceful and democratic transition of power in the country. Joining me today are two important guests who are vast in this topic, and I will give them the opportunity to introduce themselves.
My name is Ajibola Adigo, the Democracy and Governance Specialist at the Policy Innovation Center of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group here in Abuja. At the Policy Innovation Center, we try to use behavioral insights to improve policies for Nigerians. And at present, we're presently working on improving transparency and accountability in governance and assessing the gaps in human rights in the economy and governance as a whole. Very much glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ajibola.
Yeah, so I am Dengue Galapu. I am a research analyst with the Center for Democracy and Development. The Center for Democracy and Development is actually interested in key issues of democratic governance, security, and of course, issues of human rights and accountability in West Africa. We do quite a lot of work in many West African countries. We are located in Abuja, and I support the security pillar of the organization. So I do research around peace building, especially democracy and conflict analysis and peace building process, conflict management, basically.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dengilfa, and thank you so much for joining us again, Ajibola. Today's topic is a very, very important and vital one, particularly in the wake of the recent coup that is going on in the African continent that is shaking our democracy. It is important for Nigeria to re-examine its own democracy and look at the possible challenges and also solutions that can, make our democracy more stable. So I'm going to start with you, Ajibola. What do you think are the possible challenges? We need to first talk about the challenges that the country is facing when it comes to maintaining its democracy. So from your angle, what do you think are the possible challenges that Nigeria is facing when it comes to maintaining a stable democracy?
Thank you very much. Democracy itself is not bread and butter, right? It has to deliver dividends before people can appreciate it. In fact, I think Afrobarometer did a study recently and asked if people in 23 countries were pleased with the democracies that they have. And unfortunately, there's been a decline in the approvals of democracies across Africa and even in Nigeria. That goes to say that democracy itself is not a good thing by itself. It is what it brings to the table that will show whether people will appreciate it or not. And that means that the Nigerian democracy over the years has not given the citizens, the ordinary citizens, security, bread on their table, good places to sleep at night, shelter, and all of that. Which means that to sustain democracy, you have to give people a sort of reason to believe in democracy. And that, I think, is the central challenge of democracies in Africa.
Thank you so much, Ajibola. And what do you have to add from your angle, Dengilfa?
Great question. So we've been asked this question over and over again. What are the challenges with democracy in Nigeria? Quite a lot. So you see, democracy exists in a continuum. What I mean by a continuum, so you have this line, you have the extreme, you have the extremes at both ends, and it can either swing to the right or swing to the left. So democracy exists in a continuum. So you can have democracy at the very lowest level, you can have democracy at the very highest level. Very unfortunately in Nigeria, we are still battling with the very basics of democracy. And what is the basics of democracy? having a free, fair, and credible election in modern times. We've not been able to have elections that is free from violence. We've not been able to have an election that is so transparent and accountable. And then beyond that, you talk about, institutions of governance. Democracy is built on institutions. So you have institutions like a strong election management bodies. For example, in Nigeria, you have the INEC. You have the legislature, a strong legislature. You have a viable judiciary, right? Those are institutions that support a democratic process. And of course, it's citizens that are ready, that support, the governance process. So there's really a lot, a lot of challenges we are facing in Nigeria because people have not been able to accept the election processes, as being free and fair. So government is battling legitimacy crisis, real legitimacy crisis. So just for the short, lots of challenges from flawed elections to weak institutions to a docile citizenship that do not understand how to protect democratic values.
So still back to you, Dengiofa, with the recent coup that is going on in the continent, and there will be a comment from Nigerians saying, oh, maybe we should go back to the military rule. A lot of comments like that are from people that really did not experience the military rule. Because I believe anybody that has experienced a military rule won't want to go back to a military rule. But with the recent coup going on in African continent, from your angle, how do you think this has shaken first of all, we don't have a stable democracy, but how do you think this has shaken people's perception about Nigerian democracy?
Great question, really great question, I must say. Well, if you look at the coups in the world, from 1950 to 2022, we've had 486 coups in the world. We've had 242 that have been successful. We've had 244 that has failed. If you look at Africa, Africa has recorded 214. So half of the coups in the world happens in Africa. Then out of that out of that number, we've seen 106 that have been successful, and we've seen 108 that have failed. What does that tell you? It means we've had a very fair share of military rule. So when people talk about the fact that from 2020 till now there have been lots of coups in West Africa and Central Africa and all of that, and people are not celebrating military rule, I tell them it seems you're not going back to history. Because we've had our own very fair share of military rule. If you look at Nigeria, for example, I think Nigeria is about before October 1st. I know Nigeria will be about. I think now it's presently 63 years, I guess. And if you look at the 63 years of Nigeria, you have 29 years of military rule. So let us establish that first, that we have had our own fair share of military rule. So all of the celebration that I see around is the fact that, it is not a failure of democracy per se, and I have to put that plain. Because I've been in forums where we've had lots of heated arguments that democracy is failing in Africa. I said, no, democracy is not failing in Africa. The question we should be asking ourselves is that, have we even practiced democracy the right way? You cannot be practicing something that is off the track and then blame democracy for it. And I made a statement, if democracy could talk and defend itself, it would have almost disassociated itself with what is being practiced in Africa. Look at how different governments in Africa, once a tenure wants to expire, they do tenure elongation, change the constitution, and stay in power forever. Look at Cameroon. Look at Uganda. Look at the case of Gabon and all of that. So we have a situation where people are now tired, how leaders in different countries use the name of democracy to steal, use the name of democracy to conduct flawed election, use the name of democracy to perpetuate themselves in power. And then, of course, the world would say, oh, it is a legitimate form of government because they came in through elections. So in Africa, what we have seen is that the citizens are saying, no, it's just like a drowning man. A drowning man will raise his hand, not minding who pulls him up. But at this particular time, the military is actually pulling them up. So they also know that the military is not the best form of government. Let us put that straight. And that is why when the military government comes into power, the first thing they tell them is that we are just here for a short while, we will return you back to democracy. But at this particular time, People are just tired of the governance process. So let us put it let us put it straight that democracy is not really failing Africa. We are actually failing democracy. And the second argument is that people will say, oh, that democracy is alien to Africa and that it came from Athens, came from European countries, and that is why we cannot practice it right. I say no. Africa is a cradle of civilization. When democracy began in Athens, it did not begin with elections. Elections came through, the fact that the population became so big, the landmass became so big, it was now difficult for people to gather in a particular place. And I say, when the Europeans came to Nigeria and they wanted to practice direct rule, we had the North that had a centralized system. We had the Yorubas, then the West that had a semi-centralized system. We had the East that was simply egalitarian. And what happened? They had a structure where they had the community chiefs and all of that, where they come to the town hall to make decisions and all of that. And I say, what will you say that, how will you call that kind of government that was transparent, that has checks and balances and all of that? Just because it did not conduct an election, you are saying it is now undemocratic. So for me, democracy is a form of government that is actually rooted in Africa. Democracy began from Africa. Because if you look at our pre-colonial system, you have all of the tenets of democracy, transparency, accountability, how to remove a very stubborn king and chief was always entrenched in this particular environment. So let us give ourselves the glory that we also own democracy. The only thing is that we are not in a situation where people are using the name of democracy in the name of election to do all kinds of things, including, perpetuating themselves in power, stealing the common funds that we are supposed to use to develop Africa, in the name of democracy. And I think that is the problem.
Thank you so much for taking us down to the history line. A lot of people just see democracy currently going on in Africa, and as long as election is conducted, they just believe that this is democracy. They are not even looking at the process of it. And going back to what you mentioned about leaders, I was trying to browse about African leaders that have stayed more than their tenure, and I was seeing the fact that some even groom their kids and hand over to them, just like the story of the Gabon. It's like an inheritance. It's not a democratic process again. It's like, okay, I'm training my child to take over for me, like an inheritance. That is what we're perceiving now in Africa or in some African country. And Ajibola, what do you have to add about the factors that have given rise to the recent rise in coup in Africa? And how do you think Nigeria fits into this trend?
Well, I think in the past 3 years, there's been about 7 coups, successful coups, in the Sahel region. In the latest being the one in Gabon. And I think overall, people have argued that because of the regional stability that the Sahel region requires, the fact that all these long-standing presidents who've been president for years and who have replaced themselves with their children, for example, Omar Bongo and Ali Bongo of Gabon. And basically, the argument is really about the stability in the region. And that's why people, for example, the French are really supported and turned their blind eyes against, away from rather, the lack of democratic ethos in the Sahel region. So you'll see that they've actually had the support of Europe, they've had the support of France. In fact, you'll see that in West Africa, we have more Francophone countries who are in ECOWAS than English-speaking countries. Therefore, France and Europe have basically turned a blind eye to the lack of democratic ethos in that region. What that does to us as the giant of Africa, or the country at the center of that region, is that all the challenges, terrorist organizations, for example, and the incursions of armed groups coming in from the Sahel region, small arms, for example, and you will see that in Niger, which is the country that borders Nigeria in the north, you see that what does then portend for Nigeria is that Nigeria might be able to afford some of the refugees from those countries, but those countries cannot afford to get refugees from Nigeria because Nigeria, as you know, is the most populated black country. What that then tells us is that we do have a responsibility to show not only democratic stability, we also have to show example in how the democratic processes work so that when we say we want to intervene, people will realize that we have the right to. And that, I think, is a very, very important project for Nigeria as chair of ECOWAS.
Okay, so you mean intervene like in the process of, okay, the coup going on in this African country, if Nigeria wants to intervene?
Oh, my point is that our interventions has to be by example. We cannot have boots on the ground. For example, you see that America spent about 20 years in Afghanistan, and immediately they turned their backs. The Taliban took over. They had not even left the airstrip before the Taliban took over. What that tells us is that you cannot compel democracy. Democracy has to be walked through. So any intervention that Nigeria might say they are thinking about, they would have to be very circumspect about it.
Yes, thank you so much. Do you want to add something there?
Yeah, so really, if you look at West Africa and the democratic situation, the coups that we now have, I mean, he has rightly talked about the coups we had since 2020. There is something I have noticed. We had the COVID-19, and then when we had those economic downturn, I mean, all over the world, we started having coups. Right? So I have related this to two basic reasons. And one, I think, is the fact that democracy, the kind of democracy we practice in Africa, has not been able to, to push economic development. People do not see their life changing, with the practice of democracy. That is one. And then if you look at all of the countries that have had coups in West Africa, they are also countries that are battling issues of terrorism, serious terrorism. So for example, look at Burkina Faso. If you look at the Hackler data for the past 3 years, once you're looking at West Africa, the fatality rate, the incident rate, it is always higher in Burkina Faso, Mali, and then Nigeria, right? So for me, really, just to add to the discourse is the fact that all of the conditions that have made coups possible in the other countries are also present in Nigeria. I mean, we are just a bit very lucky that we've not gone to the extreme. So like he has said, I completely agree with him that this is the time to now show example. I mean, if you tell me this kind of government is better, you should show me so that I will be envious of the fact that, I want to be like the big brother of Africa, right? It is not a situation where democracy is not enforced. Democracy is a very peaceful process, and that is why when the ECOWAS talked about, going into Niger or whatever, I said, for me, it doesn't make too much sense to me, because really, you cannot be enforcing democracy by force. Democracy itself, the processes that lead to peace building in democracy itself do not allow you to use force to enforce it. So it is just basically for you to show examples and ensure that, the way you are going would lead to a dead end. I think that it's a momentary pleasure for you. And then one basic argument that ECOWAS is not even raising, really, one basic argument is the fact that when Burkina Faso had a coup, Mali had a coup, I did a study and I compared the security situation in the civilian period and the security situation after the coup. It was not remarkably better. So for Burkina Faso, from January 2023 to June 2023, we've had over 6,000 deaths. Last year we had 4,000 deaths. Well, before in the civilian rule, we were having just about 2,000 deaths thereabout, over 2,000 deaths thereabout. So you can see that even the military, Despite the fact that they said they came to solve the security situation, they've not been able to deal with the security situation. So I am thinking that ECOWAS should be bringing all of these things to bear and say, look at what they promised to do for you. Are they fulfilling it? So people will begin to question the legitimacy and the relevance of military rule. I mean, so that is it for me.
Yeah, thank you so much. You want to?
Yeah, so I must add that one very interesting thing that that occurred was when Ali Bongo was trying to ask for help and was asking people to tweet and
Make some
noise about the fact that some people are, without realizing that the same people that should make those noise are the people who he has alienated. In essence, the coupists too have to be very careful to make sure that they do not alienate the same exact citizens that they say they came to liberate.
Thank you so much. I mean, we cannot talk about, that was why I needed to ask you that, which kind of intervention, because even Nigeria, our democracy is kind of shaky. So, but I'm glad that you were able to mention that what Nigeria needs to do is, we need to lead by example. You can't tell people that this is good without them not seeing it. I mean, they have been practicing democracy according to them for like how many years after their independence, and nothing is showing. So you can't tell them that, oh, no, this is not the way, we still need to pass this democracy. And ECOWAS and African Union also have an important role to play to ensure that there's a peaceful transition of power. Coming back to Jibola again, what lessons do you think Nigeria can learn from some recent coup? As the author said, we also have our own story with coup. And what do you think, what lesson do you think Nigeria can learn from me to ensure that we do not, go back there and disrupt the democracy we have now?
So I think one of the lessons we should learn from these coups is first to not think that it cannot happen in Nigeria. In fact, there is always a mistaken idea that Nigeria has left coups in the past. That would be a very, very erroneous idea, because you never know how people will react until you push them to the wall, And it's always very, very important that one always is careful about the possibilities of things. Therefore, what that means is that there is a responsibility to make sure that we make our democracy work. That is the only bulwark, or that is the only defense that we can use to make sure that coups don't happen. The second lesson that I feel Nigeria needs to learn is also to not take for granted that because we call ourselves a democracy, we don't have a lot of work to do. In fact, I think we have a whole lot of work to do. And I'll start with our judiciary. I think it's important that we know that democracy is not just about the executive, and it's also not just about elections. It's also about the quality of the elections and the rule of law. So every time you have the fact that some people, there's a law for one set of people and there's another law for another set of people, what you have basically done is undermine democracy. In essence, democracy, as much as people like to think that democracy is just about elections, I think democracy is really about our ideas about the other human. Do I think that I'm equal to my neighbor? Do I think that I need to be treated differently? It is those sort of sentiments that really guide whether a country is really democratic or not. Those two lessons, I have others, but I'll let my...
I mean, great lessons you've actually, put on the table. I would just have to say, we have great lessons to learn. And one is the issue of flawed elections. What flawed election can actually cause. We are very lucky in Nigeria that the actors that we had this particular time, decided to go to court. But I mean, the fear for us was always that what if they choose the street, and what if it goes violent? So it was just a very big fear for post-election violence. And do we even have the capacity, looking at the fact that our military is everywhere, do we even have the capacity to curtail or another NSAS? That's it. So, I mean, look at Gabon. the issue with the coup is basically because of flawed elections. So we have to watch the election process. And what do? Strengthen our election management body, INEC. INEC should truly be independent. Truly be independent. The second lesson for me is actually the danger of stifling opposition. When they use, if you look at all of the coups that have happened, they are basically conducted, by the presidential guards, same military people that the civilian or so-called democratic leaders were using to pursue the oppositions. Now understand the fact that this is wrong, and they are now basically pursuing, it's just like the dog now, or the dog hunting the owner. So I think really we need to watch out for how we use some of these either non-state actors or state actors to pursue opposition. So don't stifle the opposition. 3, deal with the conflict issues that we have across the country. In the Northeast, our soldiers are there. In the North Central and Northwest, our soldiers are there because of banditry and insurgency. In the Niger Delta, they are there because of sea piracy and kidnapping. It is, in the Southeast, they are there for the issue of, separatist or autonomist agitations. It is only the Southwest part of this country that is a bit free, really. So we have actually, stretched our soldiers everywhere around the country. And if we don't deal with it, man's fundamental need is security. And if he does not have it, he does not care who he is loyal to. And that's why in the Northeast, some part of the country, you see where citizens are paying money to bandits, paying money to Boko Haram and the ISWAP members for protection within their local community. So deal with the insecurity issues that we have. Then, the fourth one for me really is, what is democracy to an hungry man? People want to see food on their table. They don't care about sometimes the governance, the structure that they have. So you've removed subsidy, and you don't have plans for all of the people that have been thrown into poverty. You are causing a problem, because poverty is a rallying point for mobilizing people into violence. Let us not forget that some of the conflict that we have, Northeast and Northwest, are issues caused by poverty. So deal with that. Then for me, so many lessons, but I'll just end here. But for me, the last one is about the civil society organization. The civic space has been so shrinked that even to go out on the street to protest, you are so afraid now. And people are saying, if we are afraid to protest during a civilian rule, during a military rule, should we also be afraid to protest during a civilian rule? So people are asking those fundamental questions. Look at the situation of NSAS. That wasn't in the military. That was in a civilian rule. And these kind of things can actually tip us into a scale of violence. I think Nigeria should watch it. Nigeria should be the big brother it says it is, and take this lesson seriously. But very unfortunately, sometimes when they say this thing to our leaders, they just say, they just feel it won't happen in Nigeria till we add the NSAS, and they were all surprised. We never can tell what will happen if we don't deal with it.
We never can tell what will happen if we don't deal with it. And as Ajibola had said, never say it won't happen. Like never. We never expected the NSAS to grow that big, for the movement to be that big, but it was. Coming back to you, Denilfa, what do you think is the role of the judiciary? I remember Ajibola mentioned something about the judiciary also having a role to play in safeguarding our democracy. Can you expand on the role that the judiciary have to play in ensuring that we have a democratic system, a working democratic system?
Yeah, thank you so much. So the judiciary is an important component of democracy, very important institution of democracy. Quite unfortunately, once we talk about the judiciary as ordinary people, they might sometimes tag you as, you're not part of the learned colleagues here, but I will just try. So the thing really is that what has happened in Nigeria is where we have, citizens basically now rely on the judiciary to elect their leaders. So after conducting elections, there is also another elections conducted through the courts. And what that brings on board is that many times when these cases go to the judiciary, they are now interpreted on the basis of technicalities. The common man does not understand technicality. I don't understand technicality. So if I voted for somebody and then you tell me, it's knocked out based on technicality, you are causing issues of legitimacy crisis, because when it comes, I will not believe that this person has the right to govern me. And really, governance is just about support and demand. As much as I make demand on the government to build roads, to build schools and all of that, I must also necessarily support the government. But when the judiciary brings in a strange fellow, just based on technicality and all of that, I do not think that that person has the right to govern me. And that is why you see why leaders can no longer, galvanize citizens for development. Let us not forget, one important trait of democracy is the fact that you are able to mobilize diverse groups from different cultures, from different ethnic groups, from different generational divides for development. So the judiciary has to be careful. Like I said, it's very difficult to advise them because they are in the realm of learned colleagues. But then, really, I think they have to be very careful to ensure that they are not doing the jobs of the citizens by electing candidates for us. They should study the political atmosphere and know that, this should serve political stability. This should serve the interest of the citizens. So people can have that belief in the judiciary. Very unfortunately, if you go to the street, you see that the image of the judiciary for the common man, it's so different. People were thinking that judiciary will be the last hope of the common man. I don't think that, rightly or wrongly, I don't think Nigerians think so. And I think the judiciary needs to talk to themselves and then see how they can bring back faith in the democratic process.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And from your angle, Ajibola, what do you think, or should I say, how do you think civil societies, activists are working to safeguard our democracy, especially against coup currently in Nigeria?
Yeah, so I'll be honest. The civil society organizations in Nigeria have themselves, while some have tried, I'm not sure whether they have really lived up to the billings of their responsibility. And I say this with all due respect to the organizations who are really working tirelessly. And I say this because oftentimes you find that some civil society organizations have abdicated their roles. For example, you find, it might be because of capacity reasons. It might also be because they have already also been bought over. I'll give you an example of the fourth estate of the realm, which is supposed to be the media, right? You will see that there's been encroachment into the media space of political parties and political proprietors. Therefore, what you find is media organizations who are just parrots for interest groups. Yeah. Therefore, you do not have a civic space where you can have people who can really interrogate government. On the other hand, you also have civil society organizations who themselves do not know what they are capable of. For example, it might be because of capacity issues. I'll give you an instance. So some organizations, who I do not want to mention their names, have done a lot of work with making sure that women are more involved in governance. But what you find is that there are no disaggregated data to even know the extent of the damage. So because if you do not collect disaggregated data, there is little you can do to show the evidence of how the impact of the lack of women's representation is affecting your debate. In essence, the point I'm making is that civil society organizations in Nigeria have a lot of work to do.
Most time when we talk about civil society, sometimes we forget the role of the media in also safeguarding this democracy. And if the media has been compromised also, then where are we getting the real story from? Who is calling or holding our leaders accountable and also amplifying their work or whatever they are doing in their various institutions? Dengufa, from your angle, what do you think? We've talked about the role of the civil societies, but as a young person in Nigeria, how do you think youth in Nigeria can help shape the future of democracy in this country?
Well, I think if you look at the youthful population in Nigeria, for me, that's one thing that gives me quite a lot of joy. And really, I think there's quite a lot to do. I really do not think that the youths have done enough, because I look back at all of the people that fought for our democracy with the Wole Soyinka, the Fayemis, and then all of the people that fought for democracy. You will get to realize that all these guys were at their very, very young age when they faced the military and said, no, it is democracy that we actually want. I mean, we've seen situations where the youths are now perhaps I would say more in power because of the not too young to run, not young to run law now. That has taken some of the hindrances that held them backward. But I think there's still so much to do. There's so much organizing to do. So much organizing. They have to realize the fact that we are fighting a common enemy despite being in different political parties. So it is not just about political parties. I mean, it should be really about candidates. So the youth should organize themselves, really. We saw the NSAS, and NSAS was beautiful. It was beautiful. And for the first time, the Nigerian government, despite all of the issues that went on with it, the Nigerian government listened to the Nigerian youth to say, okay, let us see how we can reform the police force. And I can tell you, many people do not even understand. They do not even know. It's not in public knowledge that the police did a lot of reform after NSAS, really. So I'm thinking that we could bring that into democratic governance. I want to see many youths, joining political parties. Because really, we cannot just be outside and be saying the system is bad, when there are very bad people. I think the good ones need to go inside now and try to change the system and do what is right. So join political parties, become grassroots leaders, from there rise to the local government level, rise to the state level, and rise to the national level. But that is not enough. My concern has been that will the youth do things differently? Because some of the youth I see, the actions of the youth sometimes do not tell me that they will do things differently from the elders. So for me, it is not really about the youth or the elders per se. It is so. I mean, if you see a youth that is intelligent, that is interested in good governance, please push him forward. If you see an elder that is interested in good governance, please push him forward, because capacity is not just built in the youth. Capacity is not just built on the elder. It is just once someone has capacity and wants Nigeria to grow, please push him forward. But I agree, the youth are more mobile, they have more energy, and of course, if they have the goodwill also, we should always push them forward. But there needs to be a lot of organizing beyond party lines, seeing themselves as as a group that has Nigeria after now, that all of this very rotten system that we have will be inherited by them. And if you know you are going to inherit this kind of system, you shouldn't be comfortable, because anyhow you japa, you one day come back to Nigeria, because this is home, and nowhere you go is like home.
Let me add a few words about youth involvement in politics and in governance. I want to say that we should applaud the not too young to run movement that got the bill passed, and for good reasons, because there has not been a single issue movement that has succeeded as much as the not too young to run. And it took the galvanization of a lot of youth groups and youth interests to work for more than over 10 years. People think that it was just something that was done in 2 years. They actually had to do this over and over again. And that shows you the resilience of the Nigerian youth. And in essence, the point I'm making is that I do not believe that the status quo, and that you have to, if you get a youth, you should bring them forward, or if you get old. I in fact think that we need to be deliberate about bringing youth involvement in politics. Why do I say this? I say this because Nigeria has a very youthful population. The average age of the average Nigerian is less than 20. In essence, they will bear the brunt of these policies longer than the old people will do. Therefore, they need a seat at the table as a matter of course and as a matter of urgency.
Thank you so much for that. And going to another question still on you, Ajibola. How can Nigeria balance the need for a strong central governance and the autonomy in our democracy? How can we balance that?
Yes, so there's usually this notion that they say Nigeria does not practice true federalism. There's this notion of true federalism. In fact, there is nothing called true federalism. Federalism is an instrument that you have to tweak and adjust. You might not even get it right because peculiarities of the times will change. For example, you would see that at one point we had regional police, right? And then regional differences upon political parties, and people use regional police to attack their opponents. And then they said, "Oh, now we need central police." Now people are asking for more regionalization of police, and there is now its bars and what's the name, and all these animal network of security, whatever, Amotekons and all of these animal named security outfits. The point I'm making is that one has to be very careful because Nigeria defines itself as the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Federalism is part of our DNA, part of our constitution. In essence, what it means is that we always have to be reworking this system to make sure that there is usually balance between the federal government and the regional government.
True. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Denyofa. Thank you so much for enlightening us about the regional and central government in this country. Coming back to you again, what partnership or collaboration do you think Nigerian government can, seek to strengthen our democracy in this country?
Thank you so much. Also, quite a lot is already on now. Of course, you know that during our elections, we had international observers. These observers, give some credibility and legitimacy to our elections. You saw the EU reports and how it was celebrated. And, that gave lot of pictures. And there is some certain way Nigeria is when local organizations say, "Oh, the elections were flawed." Nigerian government does not care. But when it came from the EU, it made so much noise. The way Bongo would say, make some noise. So when we have these partnerships that make some noise for us, it helps us a whole lot. And of course, we are also part of the ECOWAS. Thankfully, we are the leader now. So we are steering the ship. We are part of the AU and all of that. So these international memberships, UN and all of that, these international memberships actually do a lot for us. But there is something I believe that, the ECOWAS, AU, and most of this membership that we have are simply the capacities of countries writ large. So I do not believe that that we should rely on international partnerships for development for our democracy. It has to be homegrown.
I'm coming to you, Ajibola. Just a follow-up question from one of them. We heard what he said. He said the development have to start from us, Africa. That the international nation or the international organization can only make noise for us, but sincerely it has to start from us. Do you have some strategy you think can actually help us, start the development and stabilize our own democracy in Africa?
Well, if I had the answers to that, I think I would be a billionaire by now. But I'll try because I've thought deeply also about these issues. And I think one of the very important things that we need to do is not to lie to ourselves. I think the first thing is about data, right? You would see that there was a rebasement of some sort of the unemployment data in the papers, and it says that there was a report about the fact that our unemployment rate is like the US, about 4%.
4.5.
Yeah, 4.5. Basically, what that tells us is that we are not yet ready to come to face with the stark realities of our lived experience. And once we don't start with that, it is hard for us to even know how far we want to go, to know the kind of strength we need to start running, So I think what we basically first need to do, I think I always make a joke about market forces in voodoo country, in the sense that we do not necessarily know how to count, because we don't count well, because we don't know what counts. In essence, we need to be able to start counting things, and counting things that count, so that when we want to start working, when we want to start allocating resources, we allocate them to priority issues. You would see that Nigeria is the poverty capital of the world. You know, it's a very, very shameful thing to be associated with. At the same time, Nigerians have very high talent everywhere in the world. Now, what that paradox tells you is that there's a disconnect between what the human potential of the Nigerian and his lived experience in Nigeria. In essence, what you need to do is now to find how you can change the environment to make sure that the high capital that you have exported in the world can be used to develop Nigeria. What I'm trying to say is that you need really to start thinking strategically about what is important and what is important for your development. In essence, sometimes you must not run the races of other people. You must not run the race. People have their agendas. You know, people might say, change to green energy, change to blue energy, change to red energy, whatever energy they say, that's their. What you need to do is to find out what works for me. What do I need to be doing at this time? What do I need to be? And you must understand that development also, it's a process. You know, you don't want to fly before you learn how to walk. You don't want to, walk before you learn how to crawl. What you have to do is start where you are with what you have and move it forward that way. I'll stop at that. Otherwise, I'll have to send you an invoice.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Ajibola. Thank you so much for staying with us up to now. I just have one round question for our guests, and just to cap up our discussion that we'll be having on democracy in focus. Starting with you, Denilfa, what are the strategy you think Nigeria can make use of or can put in place to ensure peaceful transition of power, especially during election uncertainty? I mean, the issue of Gabon was because of election. After the election, that was when the announcement of the coup was made. So for us to prevent that in Nigeria, what are the strategies you think Nigeria can put in place?
Okay, I think that's very simple enough, and it's not really rocket science. It is simply to ensure that our elections are transparent. So, basically I tell people, if you put water in a very transparent bottle, and then you point it at me, I don't need someone to tell me that is water, and that's what transparency does. When people begin to explain transparency, I say, what are you trying to explain? Because that is why it is called transparency, because I am saying it, you're also saying it, really, and that's what I think, is missing in Nigeria. While people advocate for, the fact that elections are flawed, that people go on the street, that people complain, it is because they don't see elections as being very transparent. We missed an opportunity to have that faith in our electoral process this year, when we had the failure of the transmission of election results, when Nigeria would have seen in real time the figures and all of that. Once you see the evidence, sometimes you might not necessarily like the outcome, but you feel fulfilled that this is basically the evidence. It is less controversial when you see the evidence. So I think that we need to strengthen our election management body. So the idea that the election management body is still under the grips of the executive arm of government. So whoever becomes president appoints the resident electoral commissioners, and then appoints the INEC chairman and all of that. I don't think it's actually working. We need a situation where these people are independent and able to work for Nigerians, serve Nigerians. And the president, no matter who he is, listens. Let us not forget that the US avoided a crisis. The US avoided that crisis with the Donald Trump situations because of strong institutions. So if we want our elections to go the right way, to have all of these uncertainties, or people predicting that Nigeria will fail after election, we have to necessarily strengthen our election management body, strengthen our security to ensure that once they are deployed in an election duty, they are not there to serve the interest of the incumbent governor, they are not there to serve the interest of the incumbent president, they are there to serve the interest of the Nigerian people. So overall, really, I think it's just really about transparency. Once Nigerians see transparency, I believe that a lot of Nigerians will not complain. Let us not forget, This was same country where we had election in 2015. And people were saying, oh, this election will be so bloody. And then Goodluck Jonathan said, my ambition is not worth the blood of any Nigerian. And when the election result came out and it became glaring that he lost, I mean, he called the president and congratulated him. And that has been the most smooth transition of power that we've had in this country. So it is still possible in Nigeria once elections are transparent.
Thank you so much. I like that illustration you gave. If it's water, if it's clear, everybody knows it's water. There is no, oh, maybe this is water, maybe this is not water. I like that illustration. Thank you so much. I'll cap it off for my own end with the illustration the Nyofa gave at the beginning, that when someone is drowning and raise up the hand, and when the person doesn't care who is going to pull him out, maybe the enemy or the friend, doesn't care at all. And that is how democracy is. If we don't make it stable, people will they will assume that any help coming still help. And from Ajibola, he mentioned something very important during our discussion, that never say it's not going to happen in Nigeria. That is very, very important. We need to stabilize and maintain our democracy in this country, because I mean, democracy should be for the people, by the people, and the explanation of Abraham Lincoln. Thank you so much for staying with us again up to now. We've come to the end of this episode, and yeah, until next time, see you. Bye.